In the wake of the D&D OGL controversy, several big games were announced to fill the void. One of those, Draw Steel, comes from Matt Colville, one of the most popular DMs of our time, and was designed to make players feel heroic and generate those sought-after epic fantasy stories.
It was created to support teamworks and tactics while painting a cinematic picture of combat. It flips dungeons on their heads and incentivizes players to push on, gaining momentum as they go through the dungeon towards the final boss. It brings individuality and flair to your characters and rewards them for good gameplay. Can it deliver on these promises? And is it strong enough to stand on its own amidst this crowd of fantasy tabletop role playing games?
Hello and welcome to Tabletop Trends, where we take a look at some of the most fun and creative TTRPGs out there, ranging from some of the big names to the more obscure ones. We sit down with the designers, we ask them questions, we crack some jokes, and we play their games together. We're going to let you know how the game works, what makes it special, and the things you might love, and the things you might not love so much. By the end of it, we hope that you're going to have a good idea of how the game actually feels to play, and whether or not it's going to be a good fit for your table. Today, we've had the opportunity to sit down with James Introcaso, the lead designer of Draw Steel, and discuss the game together. First off, James is a really cool guy, and the chat was super fun. The call in its entirety will also be available in the link below.
Draw Steel is a cinematic, tactical, heroic role-playing game where you take on the roles of heroes in a world where the problems are big and your powers are bigger. You are going to be the kind of person who stands up for what's right when no one else will, and you will use your body to do it. It is a game where heroes press on. You're not going to want to stop to take a nap right before fighting the big bad. In fact, you are going to be very encouraged to see things through until the day is won without stopping to rest. And that is what Draw Steel is all about.
Draw Steel describes itself as heroic, tactical, and cinematic. It's a system that doesn't just let you play an epic fantasy, but actually encourages you to do so. That's what makes it heroic.
When we sat down and said, okay, we want to make a heroic game, we knew certain things about it. We knew we didn't want it to be a game of attrition purely, right? So D&D is a game of attrition in that you start with everything, all of your spell slots, your key points, your rages, and you winnow it down. And then right before you fight Strahd, you lock yourself in a room for 8 hours and sleep. And then you're like, okay, now it's time to fight Strahd. And we were like, that's great. And that's a fun way to do a lot of dungeon crawling adventures. And it's a really smart mechanic. But if you want to tell a heroic tale, very rarely is Hawkeye like, hey, before we fight Ultron, can we just take a nap here? Right. So like, that's sort of the idea is we wanted people to be able to like heroes press on. Right. And so we had that idea. We had this idea of victories, right? Which are this thing that inspire you to keep going. They make you more powerful. And when you rest, you lose your victories, but they convert to XP. So you don't miss the sting of it, right? And that's sort of the gameplay loop we have. Acquire victories to get more powerful throughout the adventuring day, right? Which can be longer than a day or shorter than a day, depending on the adventure. And then when you do rest, you might level up.
The core idea here is victories. You gain a victory for every combat that you overcome. But you can also gain them for non-combat things too, like solving traps, doing group checks, figuring out social encounters, or finding interesting and clever ways to avoid combat can also grant you a victory. You start the adventuring day with no victories, but when combat breaks out, you will gain class resources based on the number of victories that you currently have, meaning that as the day goes on, you actually start each combat stronger than the last one. Instead of those encounters feeling like they're meant to just whittle away your resources so you don't demolish the boss, now in Draw Steel, those combats feel like you're gaining momentum, building up steam before you're finally ready to take on the final boss. It's subtle, but has a significant impact on the player's mindset as they're going about the dungeon. So that is how the game achieves its idea of heroic. But what about the other adjectives used to describe it? We have tactical and cinematic.
When we're talking about tactical, we want a game where positioning matters, right? And so that means, hey, you've got things like flanking, you've got areas of effect that can be created, you've got terrain that people are going to have to move through, you've got height differentiations, and those mean something mechanically in the rules, right?
And playing the game really does feel tactical. Positioning really matters. From area of effect to distance to auras and a slew of other effects, you want to be precise in where you're standing.
You're flanked, which means I have an edge on the test.
Okay, perfect. So he's within 10.
But also, turn order matters too. In Draw Steel, every combat round, you can choose what order your team's going to go in, and that often makes a significant difference in what abilities you're going to do. Even in our short gameplay, we've figured out that choosing who goes when can be a big impact on the gameplay, and a pretty tactical decision that can vary from combat round to round.
Who wants to go first on the hero side?
Do you guys agree with that? Is that okay? I figured I can try to move people around as why.
If you go first, then I can immediately follow with setup.
There's also a lot of interaction on the battlefield. There are a lot of classes in Draw Steel that can affect other people in lots of ways.
You said he has an edge. I'm going to turn that into a double bane by spending 3 drama.
We also, by tactical, mean that choice matters, right? So when you are building a character, you have to make choices about at every level about like which of these powers am I going to take, what things am I going to do that are going to make me more effective. But then also as you're playing the game, you have choices to make that are like, okay, I have multiple different attacks that I can use right now. Now, I might want to use my what are my worst kind of attacks, because I can save more heroic resources and build up more heroic resources for later in the battle. But I might want to spend some heroic resources on this other thing that I can do that is kind of in between the best thing I can do and the worst thing I can do. Well, maybe that's the best thing to do, but will I around later be like, oh, I should have saved it, right? So for us, those choices all feel very tactical.
So every class has abilities they can use whenever they want that consume no resources, kind of like basic attacks. But then they have heroic abilities that let them consume their heroic resources to do bigger attacks.
And then we also said, okay, heroic resources. Well, it would be nice if they're essentially equivalent, so that if we have some powers where it's like you just get some of your heroic resource, we don't have to say for you it's 3, but for them it's 2, and for this class it's 1, and for this class it's 5, but we also need it to feel different. We need it, the ways you accumulate them to feel differently, and we need the ways that you manage them to feel different.
I get drama literally every time somebody crits, so you guys are
Yeah.
giving me a lot of drama.
And then I also gained 2 piety whenever you used malice for the first time.
The Fury has this sort of thing where they have a chart, and as they gather rage, the more they hold on to it, the more passive benefits they get. But then if they spend it to do something really cool, the rage meter goes down. So they're playing this game of sort of trying to manage it and figure it out with that. Yeah. If you are a shadow, right, when you have an edge on a roll, it costs less insight to use. So that inspires you to go ahead and hide and attack from the shadows, the way that the class would work.
Since I have an edge on one of the targets, this costs me 1 less insight, so it costs me 2 insight.
So in many ways, they're the same. They all have these heroic resources that they can spend on abilities, but we had to make those abilities feel very different and unique to everybody. And then we had to make the way you gain your resources, the way you manage them, feel different.
Now, the last descriptor used for the game was cinematic.
So for us, then the cinematic part comes in, and like, we want you to be able to visualize stuff that you're doing, and we want it to be really cool and really powerful. If we want things to be this cool, we shouldn't say, well, something's down here, so let's bring everything down to that level. We should say, no, we want things to be this cool up here, so anything that's down here, bring it up to that level, right? Today, in this meeting that we were in, we were like, this is such a cool ability because of what it does mechanically. But what the H is going on? I don't know if we can curse. So what is going on narratively? Like,
Right.
and if we don't know that, we're failing that pillar, right? And so that's where kind of the cinematic nature of it all comes in.
Classes themselves really dive into the archetype and narrative they're going for through their resources that we talked about, but also through their abilities. The name, the mechanics, and the flavor text combine to really give a feel for what is happening. Take a look at this Fury ability. Its name is Roar! And the flavor text is Death! Death! The ability deals damage, but it also frightens and dazes an enemy. You can really get the idea of what's happening when you use this ability. The barbarian is just slashing into the enemy, terrifying them, and causing them to freeze up. And the way that that concept is delivered through the text is also filled with flavor. Compare this ability to one that's given to the Censor. The Censor is kind of like a really angry cleric. They have an ability that's quite similar in mechanics. It deals damage, and it dazes the enemy. This ability's name is Repent, and the flavor text is you conjure up memories of their sins. You can immediately tell what's going on with this ability, and roleplay-wise, how it differs from the Fury's ability, despite their mechanical similarities. Now, I'm not giving this example to say that all classes have similar abilities, just flavored differently, because that's not true. I'm just saying even the ones that mechanically are similar, flavor-wise, are quite different. Okay, now that we've looked at the main goals of the game and how it achieves them, let's talk about some of the more core combat concepts. First off, in Draw Steel, all attacks hit. The question isn't if they hit or not, but how hard they hit. In our interview, James breaks down why they went with this decision.
In a game where sometimes it can take 15 minutes or more to come back to you, right? The D20 starts to feel like the do I get to take my turn die. We spent a long time trying to find a dice system that would make not missing feel heroic, right? But also give you a sense of danger, because you're also not getting missed when you're attacked, right? I think a lot of people think of it as like the snowflake generation, everybody gets a trophy, nobody misses anymore. It's like, yeah, but that's true of the monsters too. So
Yeah.
it's not great, right, that this is happening.
So they came up with the concept of a power roll. What you do is you roll 2 d10s, add your modifiers, and if the result is 11 or lower, then you did an okay result. If it's 12 to 16, then it's a good result. And if it's 17 or higher, then you have a great result. Now, mathematically, if you roll 2 d10s, this is what the distribution looks like. If you don't have any modifiers to the roll, the chance of a low result is 55%, a medium result is 35%, and a high result is 10%. However, if you add just 2 to the roll, you shift it to 36% for low, 43% for middle, and 21% for high. This is where level 1 characters start. As you can tell from this, the math is going to be a lot tighter, so bonuses and modifiers aren't going to reach very high. Now, there's another concept tied to power rolls called potency. Potency is a way to determine if something is affected by a status effect or not.
People are very okay with, hey, I attack you and you take damage, and that's how it is. People are fine with that because that happens in games all over the place that aren't role-playing games, and in some role-playing games. But people are not okay with, now you're knocked prone because I rolled well, right? People are not okay with, now you're slowed because I rolled well. They're like, hey, I don't get a chance to defend? What's going on? How does this work? So potency says, essentially creates AC for these status conditions, right? And says, hey, if I'm attacking you, and this plays into the power roll, right? And your might is less than 2, then you are knocked prone. But if your might's 2 or higher, you're fine, right?
I think potency is a really clever and succinct way to combine all the rolls into one. What is not succinct in Draw Steel, though, is skills. They function pretty similar to D&D, except for one big thing. There's a bazillion of them. We asked James why there are so many, considering that a lot of games are moving away from having individual skills at all.
When you make a test in our system, right, you can justify the use of a skill, right? And I feel like that is similar to sort of the 13th Age background thing, where it's like, hey, I'm going to justify my background in this, and if I do, I get this bonus, right? The thing that I've always found in 13th Age then is that people try to pick like the broadest background they can think of, because then it applies to every situation. There are certain things in 5e that like, it's like, hey, you're really good at climbing, swimming, and jumping if you have athletics. You're just good at all of those. And those, having done track and field, are not related. For me, narratively, it feels more like the guy who's really good at high jump shouldn't also be the best swimmer. The third part is that because the math of draw steal is still pretty tight, that what happens when you have 3 levels of success means all of a sudden, right, things get a lot tighter in terms of like the number of bonuses you can have, that sort of thing. So having more skills meant that we could say, okay, instead of, hey, you get better at this thing, you get better at something else, and you get to pick another skill as you level up. So it was those 3 things that led us to do that.
When you create a character, you end up with a fraction of the available skills. In my character at level 1, I had 8 out of the 57 skills. Yes, 57. Thankfully though, through the character creation process, you select skills that are applicable to your character and actually help flesh out a lot of your character in a way that I've never seen before. When we did our one-shot, I built a character and I usually just focus on combat because, I mean, that's kind of what I want to analyze for game systems, most of all. When we started a game, I was surprised to discover that I had a really clear idea of who I was, my core concept of my history and background and my motivations. And those selections you make for your background and history are actually mechanically rewarding, and they give your GM a lot of hooks to dig into your character. This is by far the greatest character creation I've ever done. And continuing that blend of roleplay and mechanics, there's a new framework introduced called the negotiation framework, a way to guide you and give you a blueprint for social encounters. Personally, I think social encounters are maybe the hardest thing to do as a DM, so I really welcome any tools to do this.
We've all been in situations where it's like we're negotiating for something. We basically argue back and forth until we're tired of the scene, and then somebody makes a charisma check, and then it's like, okay, that was good enough. You get what you want, right? And I think what we wanted to do was provide a framework that could help you feel the stakes of that conversation and also give the director a guide to say, here's how this NPC is feeling right now in this moment. And so, okay, we have these 2, right, instruments. We have your interest. How interested are you in the deal that is being laid out by the PCs, right? And you have patience. How much more are you going to endure this conversation? And by tracking those 2 numbers, we can look at it and say, like, okay, they're kind of into the deal, but they're getting impatient. And so they might say, like, this is my final offer, and here's what it is, right? And I think that's the big thing that people should take away from this, is that it's those tools are really there for the director so that the director can know, is this conversation close to wrapping up or not? And the director can also know, how should I feel at the start of this? If I know how the person feels at the start of this conversation, I know about how many different ways, different arguments you need to make to me to get me on board with what you want.
I think if the negotiation tool is used poorly, it'll be really easy to make it feel gamified and boring. But if the DM can use it well, I think it can be very rewarding and offer a lot of depth to social encounters that I find often lacking. Now, there's a ton of stuff that I would love to get further into. Things like kits, surges, hero tokens, and way more. This game gets pretty crunchy when you get into it. The question is, how crunchy? We asked James to put Draw Steal on the Crunchometer, a scale from 1 to 10, with Dungeons & Dragons 5e being a 5, right in the middle.
I think I probably put us, because we are a game that in many ways relies on, like, we've made some harder decisions in that, like, okay, we are going to rely on the grid, for instance, right? When you're playing this game, it relies on the grid. By definition, you're in a box, right? And you've got some rules to look at that are going to make that happen. The tactical nature of the game means that it's got a lot of rules and a lot of options. And so all those rules and options make it, I think, crunchier than 5th edition, but I don't think that it gets to like much crunchier levels. So I would probably put it at a 6. 7 would be fair too. I would definitely, if somebody wanted to argue 8, I would hear them out. But I don't think we approach some of the levels of, much crunchier games. 9 or 10 would be like out of the question.
All right, so now that we've discussed the mechanics of the game, why don't we have a conversation and see the things that we enjoyed and didn't like as much about it? Maybe this time we'll go topic by topic and cover it from that way. So the first one, maybe we can talk about combat.
I found combat was really fun. I think, like a couple of other games we played, like DC-20, it felt like you always had a really good variety and a good amount of things that you could do without it also feeling overwhelming at the same time. There was a good amount of choice, but you never really feel like there was too much, if that kind of makes sense. Whereas in D&D and other games like that, it's you kind of just get a lot of times it feels like you have one thing to do, and it feels like your thing to do is attack, maybe move, and that's kind of it. That felt like there was a good amount of options to to attack, to support your party, to do all kinds of other different things in different ways that could actually have a meaningful impact on the encounter or on the battlefield or on your allies in some other way.
It kind of feels like you're starting as like a 5th level character in D&D.
Yeah.
You already have a lot of options, a lot of different powers and skills. And so I found that really nice to just be a level 1. It feels like a level 1 in D&D is very boring. I find it hard not to compare to DC-20. There's a lot of similarities, and also I played a throwing barbarian in this one and a DC-20, so I've got like a straight apples to apples comparison. Both felt really good. This one felt
like in different ways.
They both felt good in different ways. This one felt a lot faster and smoother in combat, because I think like this barbarian was actually designed to like toss people around all over the place. Whereas like the DC-21 can do it, but it's not like the barbarian is just built to only do that, right? So it felt like I'm making an attack and I'm like smashing them. Whereas DC-20, I'm like, I make an attack, I grab, then I make an attack, compared to them, and then I throw. Like it felt, this one, I would say like this one probably would run a lot faster than DC-20 once you get the hang of it.
I played a null when we were running our playtest, and I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing it. It's kind of like a monk equivalent for anyone else who's thinking about it. The one thing that felt a little bit or there are two things I guess that felt a little bit challenging that I had with playing the class. It felt like I had to be super close and really, it's a melee character, and I felt like I had to be right up close and personal with everyone to actually accomplish anything. But he didn't have like a ton of movement, and it felt like everyone else was just like blasting things from across the entire map, and every time I would finally get close enough to something, then it would just be dead by the time I got there, or it didn't feel like I was really able to kind of feel the impact of a lot of the really cool and awesome abilities that my character had. And then the kind of knock on of that was that I kind of felt like I struggled to generate enough of my class resource to really also kind of get the things flowing and get to start making things happen. It really felt like I was just kind of struggling to build momentum with the class. Now, it could have been just to do with the encounters. It could have been because I'm a terrible character builder, which is 100% accurate. And also maybe there's just some kinks to work out with the class, or it could be a combination of all three. I'm not 100% sure, but those are definitely some of the struggles that I had, at least with the null.
Obviously, we've only played 2 classes, so we can't comment on everything. From our playtest, everybody else seem to quite enjoy their class, so it could just be like maybe the null is a lot more situation dependent, right? And that combat just didn't fit with what needed to happen for a null. What did you think about the power roll, the way that it works out? It's 2d10s, and then basically you resolve it in 3 options.
I felt a bit conflicted, to be honest, on the power roll. I'm someone that's really embraces the chaos of the D20. I like how swingy and insane it can be, and I know that it doesn't always make sense, and I know a lot of people hate it because of that. But it's just something I enjoy, that inherent, very strong randomness that the D20 brings. 2d10 obviously brings a lot more consistency to your die roll, because you're kind of going to be hitting middling numbers most of the time. But then the other thing as well with the power roll is that you're kind of always competing, in a sense, competing against the same sort of bracket or same range of values every single time. So it's always like 11 or less, and then 15 or 16, whatever the numbers are, 16 or less and 21 or less, or whatever it is. I don't remember the exact numbers, but you're always kind of competing against the same sort of range of numbers, which to me wasn't always like the most exciting thing. And I know in a sense that you're kind of doing that in 5e with like armor class and stuff, but it's still, it changes from encounter to encounter. Not every monster has an AC of 15, and not every monster has the same hit points, and not every spellcaster has the same spell save DC. You know, there's a lot more fluctuation, whereas this, no matter what you're fighting, the ranges on the power roll are identical. So that can get a little bit monotonous for some people. I don't think, obviously, we didn't really play enough for me to think that, oh, this is getting boring. So it was still fine. It was still fresh and fun. But I can definitely see how that potentially could get a little bit tedious. I know we played another game, Vagabond, where it was like very, very strict. It was always the same number that you had based on your own like internal like DC that was kind of based on your own stats. And that to me, like, even within one session, got a little bit tiresome like every single time. So this definitely offers a lot more variety and a lot more kind of dynamism with it, because at least there's like different things are happening depending on where you hit within that range. But I just talked a lot about it, so I'm curious, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. I'm buying more and more over into always hitting is fine. And so
Yeah. I'm slowly converting to.
I don't mind the not missing part, because number one, it's just like you're in those fights where you're just like everybody on your team misses, and the goblins got like 1 HP left. You're like, come on, guys. I mean, as a DM, you could just say like, oh, you won, whatever. But it does feel nice to do something. And this is more than just like a token. Okay, you do like 2 damage on a miss or something like that. So I like that about it. I don't mind like the normal distribution or like the triangle distribution of it.
Yeah.
If we're comparing this to DC 20, which I guess we're doing every point, in DC 20 it's super easy to get lots of advantage.
Yeah.
I don't think like we ever missed in DC 20. Right? The question is just maybe how strong did you hit, right? Because you've got those, I can't remember what they're called, but like the tiers of hitting, right? So the question is like, oh, was it a brutal hit, or like was it a heavy hit? Exactly.
Hit, yeah.
All right, and so that kind of feels a bit like this too, where it's just like, okay, normal hit, heavy hit, brutal hit, like, because in DC 20 you like pretty much never miss.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. And when you put it like that, I'm like, okay, actually, I'm here for that.
Yeah. So I did like the power rolls. I didn't have any potency things, but I know that you said that you liked it.
Yeah, potency took me forever to understand. I felt very silly, spending way too long trying to understand the way that the actual mechanic and the feature works. But once I finally did, it ended up being something that I really think is actually kind of brilliant design. And despite I had significant apprehension going into it, it ended up being something that I found was like really satisfying to land, and really rewarding to kind of see play out. And obviously not just for me, but for everyone else who was playing in our games as well. It was really cool. I really liked it.
Why don't we move over to classes? We talked about them a little bit. In terms of class design, how each one has their own pool of resource that they use and gain in very different ways, I think is a really interesting way to approach classes.
I think the most important thing and the most defining thing to me is that all of the classes felt very different. It really felt like every class was doing different things. They had different ways to generate resources. They had different ways to spend those resources. They had different things that they could do. They had different maneuvers available to them. They had just a whole host of options that didn't just feel like, congratulations, half of the classes now have spellcasting and you're all just throwing fireballs left and right. And that was really cool. It felt genuinely unique and really satisfying and interesting in a really great way.
I do want to say, I had zero clue what was going on anybody else's turn. Like, I think that was like a big downside. I was like, I know what I'm doing on my turn, but like, I have no clue what you're doing. I don't even know what your class, like, because they have the different class names, people are doing a lot more, and so like you have no clue what they're doing, at least in my opinion.
No, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think like even at the beginning I talked about how you had a lot of things to do and it didn't feel overwhelming, and that's very true, but that also kind of plays into the same sort of thing. There's a lot of things happening and I don't really know what any what any of them are, which
Yeah.
is, I guess, tangentially related. I don't know if we'll get to this later, but like just as like a structure from the book, this was probably one of the most challenging rule books that I've ever had to. I had to shoehorn this in here. It was probably one of the most challenging rule books that we've had to get through, or at least that I've had to get through as long as we've been doing this so far. I know that I'll say it right now. I understand. Yes, I know it's a beta, but at the same time, there was so much of it that was so challenging to get through. It just felt like every paragraph they were throwing out new words and new terminology. There's a lot of terminology in this game, and I'm sure that it will be nicely laid out and defined once the book actually releases. But at least for the version that we played, it was definitely very challenging.
I 100% agree. Like, everything is different terminology. It
Yeah.
feels, it almost feels like mean in some ways, where like that terminology really could have been the same as other games. You know,
Yeah.
like you're gonna call the monk the null. Like I thought that was like a psionic class or something when I first read it. You know, it's like everything has a different name for arbitrary reasons. I hope it's laid out beautifully. I hope it just makes sense as you read it.
Yeah.
I feel like they're gonna have a challenge ahead of them as they design that, though. Kind of jumping off from that a little bit, I want to talk about this idea of a gameplay loop that James talked about. It feels really cool. I really like the idea of it, and I actually like really want to play an adventure just to experience like how that feels as a player.
Something you had mentioned before we started recording is just the idea of like there's very few things that happen in a tabletop game that really make you fundamentally kind of approach the game differently, but this sort of feels like one of those. So I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit because it was a really interesting thought.
Yeah, I just feel like this. It's so often that you like go into a dungeon in D&D, and if you can swing it in any way, you'll take a long rest whenever you can to be at max capacity, right? And it doesn't feel heroic. You know, it doesn't feel like a story.
Yeah.
It feels like you're kind of like gaming the game to get as much as you can out of it. So this like discourages that, right? Instead of just like the DM just being like, no, you can't do that. You know, like the game itself encourages you to play that way. So like by the end, you've built up all these victories. You come into the big bad boss fight with a bunch of victory points and a bunch of class resources that you can just like, you know, you're at your strongest, which is like strange.
It definitely flips the typical gameplay loop on its head, and likely, like I said, we didn't really get to experience it, but I think likely in a very positive way. Like I don't think everything needs to be hyper realism. Like I think there's, this game really leans heavily into that heroic fantasy, right?
All right, and the last big one is negotiation.
Conceptually, like just hearing it, it sounds like a cool idea, but again, it's just one of those things where I do worry that it's one like a player might just kind of settle into like, okay, I got to make sure that I hit these sort of tick boxes, and instead of like trying to have a natural conversation, they're just feeling around to see if they can find like what are the things that I'm supposed to say, what are the things that are going to give me the result that I want. It's a cool framework that they've established, but there's definitely like so many ways that it can play out. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too.
I love the negotiation like sheet that they have for a character, and being like, okay, like these are the things that will work for them, these are the things that won't. This is like how patient they are at the beginning of this conversation. Like these are the things you could bring up to make it better. Like I think just giving that to a DM and saying like go would be very beneficial. And I feel like it's such a hard thing for DMs. I think negotiations or like social based encounters are, I think, the hardest things for GMs to get right, especially new ones, right? Like I was terrified of doing that. I think I still am in many ways. I'm just like, I don't know, like what does this person think of that? You have to think of so much, like be in that character's head, or like what would they want, what would work for them, and sometimes it often just ends up as like, okay, was your persuasion roll good enough?
Yeah.
And like it doesn't matter what they were saying with that persuasion, was just like, was it high enough? So I really like this, how it gives avenues, and I think it encourages people to actually roleplay and say certain things right? Like it encourages them to think as a character and think of actual solutions instead of just like, I rolled this, now do that. You know, so I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
After discovering this heroic evolution of tabletop games, it makes me wonder, what else is out there waiting to be played?
Find out with us next time on Tabletop Trends.